All right, thank you so much for being here and for hanging in with us until the end of the day on a beautiful day. My name is Tracy Bergstrom, and I'm the Program Manager for Collections and Infrastructure with Ithaka S+R. I'd first like to introduce our panelists today. So as Senior Director of Product Management, Judson Dunham leads a team of product managers responsible for developing and maintaining Science Direct, Elsevier's flagship full-text search and discovery platform. Judd has been in project management at Elsevier for over 15 years, working in and around STM discovery and workflow products, including Science Direct, Scopus, and Mendeley. Ellen Kimmel is the Research Operations Team Lead with the Research Center at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. In this role, she leads the Research Center's AI strategy, harnessing the power of generative AI to drive innovation and to help the research team streamline their research processes. She leads AI lunch and learn sessions for National Academy staff, focusing on artificial intelligence, generative AI, AI for research and for tracking policy and research impact. Through this, she helps staff translate their day-to-day tasks into more efficient workflows by integrating Gen AI, enhancing their productivity, and enabling them to focus on high-value activities. And finally, Anu Vedantam, who will join us virtually, is the incoming Associate Director of Teaching and Learning at Rowan University's Libraries, after holding leadership roles in libraries at Princeton, Harvard, and Penn. Princeton is a member of Ithaka S+R's cohort project on making AI generative for higher education, and she co-led the generative AI faculty interviews process for this project at Princeton this past year. She has researched media literacy for many years, including through her doctorate in higher education. She loves to explore new technologies, but is often reminded of the social and political forces that have led to their creation. Her writings have focused on student-centered libraries and their use of multimedia assignments and collaboration spaces to engage undergraduate audiences. So before we get started, a bit of framing about this panel. The impetus for this discussion was a recent Ithaka S+R report titled A Third Transformation, Generative AI in Scholarly Publishing. For this research, we interviewed 12 leaders in stakeholder communities, ranging from large publishers and technology disruptors to academic librarians and scholars. We asked about attitudes towards Gen AI at present and areas where interviewees thought they would see either incremental or transformative change. This report is a companion to our January 2024 report assessment of the state of the scholarly publishing industry as it navigates the second digital transformation. That is, if the first is print to digital, the second represents the needed infrastructures and workflows to support more digital scholarship. And we thank STM Solutions and 6 of its member organizations who have supported this project and its research. Just a couple quick notes about the major themes that cross the two reports. Scholarly publishing as a whole is in the midst of a long-term shift away from a model centered around editorial work towards one based on services and platforms. We certainly expect generative AI to accelerate this trend. For several decades, consolidation has been one of the major trends in the scholarly publishing industry, and competition over the platform, analytics, and author services businesses in the sector has been fierce. Generative AI has implications for each of these business lines. By creating new opportunities for human-machine interaction across that value chain, generative AI raises important questions about when, where, and how human labor and knowledge add essential value to scholarly communication. One overriding theme we heard across interviews was that the quality of content that currently underlines LLMs is not reliable enough to ensure the integrity of the scholarly record. To guarantee research integrity in conjunction with increasing use of Gen AI tools, interviewees frequently cited the need for new standards in particular to ensure consistency and transparency. In terms of making meaning, Gen AI tools provide researchers with the ability to derive new meaning from the scholarly record in ways not possible before. And finally, Gen AI has the potential to be transformative for new business models, for those with the resources to best adapt and harness its potential. We heard a lot about trust and trustworthiness, and I just thought I would call out 2 things here. The first is that most of the individuals interviewed for this report see a future in which Gen AI becomes embedded in workflows across the publication lifecycle, making positive contributions to the goals, processes, and infrastructures for scholarly publishing. The path to this future, however, depends on stakeholders taking action now to ensure that definitions around what constitutes ethical usage of Gen AI is understood consistently across authors, readers, rights holders, publishers, and aggregators. I have a QR code for the report here, and I'm glad after this panel to receive any comments about it or suggestions for which further research is really needed on behalf of all of us around this topic. So we're going to transition now to discussion. As sort of a quick show of hands to start us out, how many of you use Gen AI in your work on a weekly basis at the moment? Great, that's maybe about half people, including some who are very enthusiastic. More than that, maybe every 48 hours or once a day. All right, good. We've got maybe 10 people in the room who show that, including Ellen. So as a first question, we all come from different areas and roles in academia or scholarly communication. In the context of the work that you do, what areas of the report were resonant to you and why? Anu, can you start us out?
Sure. Hopefully you're able to see and hear me okay. Thank you, Tracy, for bringing us together for this panel. I really wish I could be there with you in person in Charleston. I think zooming into a great conversation always feels like I'm being cheated out the fun parts. So I'm missing that. I've been working in academic libraries since 2007 at 3 highly selective universities, and I've centered on how faculty can take advantage of new technologies to save themselves time and also for their students to increase comprehension and to care more deeply about the content of coursework and research projects. And I've noticed how different the process is for a first-year student who's just learning how to do research to postdocs who are under pressure to publish several peer-reviewed articles every year, and at the other end of the expertise spectrum for faculty who would like to influence how their discipline assesses research. And the incentives and motivations and structures are so different based on where you sit and what your constraints are. So my congrats to you and to Dylan for this excellent report. I really appreciated how you worked to capture the differential impact that AI is having on how an individual approaches their research. You've really done a great service by describing the different tasks that researchers do and how Gen AI might affect each of them, and the tendency to expect either too much or too little from each of the new technologies is something I really appreciated. The detail in the report. I'm glad you had that poll already, so we have a sense of who's in the room and how often everyone uses these technologies. If folks are not already familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, I would recommend taking a look. They've been watching the rise and decline of technologies for so many years, and they have several graphics with predictions for generative AI. And the reasons to avoid Gen AI, for those of you in the room that did not raise your hands, the reasons for avoiding it can vary. So we'll need to unpack the hesitations. We'll need to compare the hesitations to the way we reacted to earlier technologies, as well as how we react to human errors. So when I'm supporting someone with research, I really find metaphors to be very helpful. So I'll share just a few. There's so many in the air right now. So some people compare generative AI to the spell check in Microsoft Word. It's a feature that saves you time. It helps people with weak English skills or difficulties with reading or spelling, and generally reduces friction. It allows me to write without distraction, but occasionally it gives ridiculous suggestions. Some people compare generative AI to the calculator, and we no longer do long division by hand now that we have technology that does our arithmetic for us. Some people compare generative AI to a personal human assistant, someone who follows directions and finds and organizes information, learns our preferences, and eventually becomes like our own butler, like Jeeves from the P.G. Wodehouse books. And some people compare Gen AI to like a personal software developer who learns how we want things done and then automates the tasks. And in some ways, generative AI is asking us to reflect on how we do research. Often I find people reacting so strongly to AI's hallucinations when the system gives a result that's clearly wrong. There's almost a sense of glee. There's like this feeling of silly mistakes by AI give us confidence in our own work. And I hope we can talk a bit more about that over our time together. I hear excitement on tools that save time on tasks that individuals do not enjoy. or do not find meaningful. So, for example, tools that create instructional videos or slideshows are greeted with joy by people who are not themselves drawn to these tasks. People who don't enjoy report writing are drawn to the tools that generate emails and summaries. But if a task is meaningful to an individual, or they see that task as somehow key to the quality of their work, there's a lot more hesitation to outsource it or delegate it, which is kind of similar to what we were doing with human assistants in previous decades. So I really appreciated this section in the report that talked about leveling the playing field and reducing the privilege for English speakers and increasing the access to publications. It reminded me a little bit about in the past when we've expected new technologies to reduce barriers to access. Sometimes it has happened and sometimes it has not. And I'm very curious to see where generative AI takes us. So thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Tracy.
Thanks so much. Ellen, can I ask you the same question?
Sure, and I actually call it my AI concierge because I use it daily. And we're going to do a voice prompt at the end to show you how that works. But so Anu comes from scholarly realm. I'm not an academic librarian. How many of you are academic librarians? Well, that's what I thought, a lot of you. Okay, so I'll just say this. I've worked as a librarian at a think tank, an advertising agency, an automotive consulting firm, and now the National Academies, which is a nonprofit that puts out science and health policy. So the thing that I really spoke to me about your Ithaka S+R report, Tracy, was the section skills and expertise for librarians and researchers, and how important it is that we as information professionals are the first to learn generative AI. And what do we do naturally? We teach how to find research, how to find things to our colleagues. So it fits in really nicely as information professionals. So that section on the report, and when we talk about foundational AI skills, I'd encourage you to use AI at least 10 minutes a day, build up your AI literacy, build up your understanding of data interpretation, and also how can we ethically use AI. So the onus is kind of on us as librarians and information professionals to take that time to build up our skills and develop it. And I really think you'll see it in spades turn off as your colleagues look to you for advice on how to use generative AI. And Judd is not a librarian, but Judd, you want to give your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So from the world of product development in this space, and as a vendor, the way I think we think of it is that looking back on the last 20 years or 25 years of having content online and having online products and databases, many of us are almost like in the logistics business, right? We spend a lot of time with researchers, with students, trying to understand what are the problems that they're trying to solve with the scholarly communication. And we go back and we come up with all these great ideas of possible solutions, but in the end, what we end up doing is finding ever more, clever and more efficient ways to get people to a PDF or something like that. And for me, I think what resonates in this is the idea of a shift to services and platforms. We really believe there's just been an explosion of creativity and prototyping and new product development using generative AI as an enabler. We really think now we have the tools that we need to actually start solving the problems of why students and researchers are looking for scholarly information in the first place, and do that in ways that will really make it better, faster, and cheaper for them. So it's super exciting, and I do think that that's what the next several years hold, is some really innovative services and platforms that will make us kind of look back and chuckle at the 25 years we've spent giving people slightly faster keyword searches to get more documents and more PDFs on their hard drives.
Thank you all so much for those. So, of course, generative AI has the potential to fundamentally change what we think about as authorship or as readership. How might this change what we think of as authorship or readership in scholarly communications? Ellen, can I ask you to start?
Yeah, I think personally all of our organizations are struggling with this, right? Like, should we allow our colleagues and staff to use it? And you may have a vague policy, you may have a detailed policy. I encourage you to, one, get highly trained on generative AI so that you and your team become AI fluent. And I think it'll become very clear what the pros and cons of each tool are. Instead of arguing about potential and philosophical, if you're using AI, you'll understand and you'll be able to translate what's an appropriate task for AI and what's not. So when we talk about authorship, right, and machine learning, and these AI systems are putting out more content than ever, right? They're producing more content, but what's missing is the context. And us as humans, our expertise, we're always going to have better judgment towards translating that content. So I encourage you to not only get highly trained on generative AI, but talk to your colleagues about it, see how they're using it. You might be surprised who's using it and for what. And I think it's much better to be transparent at the beginning process versus at the end, and you get to peer review and you're like, what? That wasn't allowed. So anyway, authorship, I think it's something we have to tackle as collaboratively as a team. And I know at the National Academies, I'm working a lot with my communications colleagues, which are all the creatives and the writers, and how are they going to use it? Because in this wave of generative AI, Tracy, it's not those with the technical skills. It's those with the humanities background. The English majors are the ones that speak the language the best. So when they get going with AI, everyone is going to be paying attention to that.
That's very true. Judd, what would you add to that?
As an English major, I really appreciate the vote of confidence.
Great.
Yeah. I came into tech through the back door. So I agree. I think that, I mean, what we're seeing both on the input side in terms of authorship as well as on the readership side, there's obviously huge changes in store. I don't think that it's going to be what everybody sort of assumes it is if you look at it on the surface. We see a lot of, and we've got a lot of, frankly, earned blowback, we put it sometimes the guardians of trust in science, as the people who run the peer review process. When a bunch of articles show up in journals that have clearly been partly authored by ChatGPT, that's a bad look. And we are working very, very hard on coming up with policies on, on publishing ethics that enable authors to use generative AI for the purposes that we know it can be good for, and to do it in a responsible way and make sure that our input systems still function as gatekeepers. Because on the output side, the types of things that I want to build on Science Direct, and all of us in the vendor space want to be able to build with us, if it's not based on fundamentally sound and trustworthy research, then there's no value. Then we've reverted to the mean, and you might as well go use ChatGPT. So we take both sides of it very, very seriously. I think on the readership side, which is closer to my world, I also think that it will change a lot, but I think it's, again, not the way people think. The currency, the unit of value in the world of like a publishing platform or Science Direct is a PDF download. And I think a lot of people make a mistaken assumption that if someone has downloaded a PDF, you see a lot of metrics out there of like, oh, that's a read. And we can tell you, because I see it, when we put a PDF reader on Science Direct, only half the people that opened the PDF actually ever saved it. And the rest of them were spending time maybe looking through it and finding out they didn't need it, and then they abandon it. So I think the metrics will change. But I definitely think, with the things that we've been working on, I know even, things that are possibly even more innovative, within 5 years, the idea of researchers sitting down and reading through a long form PDF and using their own eyeballs to extract information is going to, again, be a sort of a weird relic and an anachronism.
I'm not doing that anymore. I will.
I'm sure you are not. Yeah.
ChatGPT, sum this up. I need these key points.
Right.
Now, if I'm doing a systematic review, yes.
And then
but
verify.
If I'm just scoping, I don't have the time or the energy. I'm going to use AI to help me read it faster.
And I think the closest analogy is, when we talk to researchers and say, what do you really, what really lights up your day? A common answer is when I find a review article that is like tailor-made to what I'm studying, because then someone has done all the work for me. And I think that what we're looking at, the kind of outputs that really, make people light up when we're talking about generative AI, is something like a personalized review article, something that's full of references to the literature that gets them to what, lets them verify the assertions the way you would by following a reference. And I think if you can imagine it that way, that's a kind of a blending of almost authorship and readership on the fly that meets the needs of the researcher or the student. I think that's just tremendously exciting, and it feels within our grasp.
What do you call that term?
What do you mean?
The blending of authorship and readership. Is there a term?
I can
I
think
don't
of a
have
good
one.
acronym for that.
We should,
next year.
Yeah.
I'll work on that for next year.
Okay.
I do want to make sure we give Anu the chance to respond to this question too.
Yeah, no, I think it was really interesting to hear, Judd and Ellen. I think I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle, but I'm definitely some of your thoughts resonating with what's on my mind too. So what I'm hearing when I talk with faculty is that some of them have a lot of interest in using generative AI to automate part of their work. They're asking AI to read and summarize new articles. I've heard, for example, using AI to convert an article into a podcast so that it's easier to listen to rather than to read it, finding ways to use machine learning. But I'm also hearing hesitation and a need to maintain some control over research workflow just to have confidence in the results. So one of the things that the report talks about is that LLMs do manufacture fake citations, or they cite inaccurately. They take something out of context. And the process of verifying that original record is pretty difficult. It's time consuming, it's onerous. So I do think generative AI may lull an inexperienced researcher into complacence. And that may, in the long run, really reduce confidence in research. So we know that generative AI algorithms, they do have systematic biases and weaknesses. And as these practices become commonplace, it will increase disparities where some sources will receive a lot more attention than they should, and other sources may be ignored. And I think that piece, the issues that come up with close reading and distant reading, I completely agree, Jed, that people are not going to be as likely to read the whole thing in the future. The incentive for writers to be careful really diminishes because it's much less likely that I'm going to go find the original article and read it if generative AI gives me the impression that it's not relevant to my work. And then I'm handing over something important, something that would have been something that I would have made a judgment on. Already we see how social media can amplify the results of certain research articles, and this tying together of research and the marketing of research, I think it does raise questions for the kind of the integrity. I know we're going to talk more about research integrity later. Faculty have talked with me about the importance of using generative AI for tasks that the technology is good at, like creating the abstract for an article, finding bits of similar information across multiple articles, unearthing connections that they might not have seen themselves, and in particular, summarizing it for lay audiences. I think that is something that generative AI is really, really helpful at. So kind of returning to that metaphor I gave earlier of the personal assistant, we all remember the movie clips where a business tycoon asks their secretary to buy an anniversary gift for their spouse, and it doesn't really go well. And I'm reminded of that. Every tool can be used for certain things, but there are other things that you really might not want to use that particular tool for. So I completely agree with Ellen about being transparent. So some faculty are actually asking their students to include all the transcripts of their generative AI tools with their homework. And this acknowledges that it is being used, so we might as well just put it out there. This is what I got, and this is where I got it. I do think there will be a spectrum of use of generative AI, and so it might be important for us to set up some guidelines so that people who use generative AI and people who don't use generative AI, that their work can be looked at in some coherent way in comparison with each other, rather than assuming that people will not use it or assuming that everybody will.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you. In thinking about how generative AI is likely to change how we conduct research in the coming 5 years, what do libraries need to be prepared for, or what new skills should academic researchers develop to work effectively with AI? Judd, will you maybe start us out on that?
Yeah, I think I will reiterate what Ellen said. I do think it's, and it's, I've attended a number of sessions around here where people are just saying this in some form or another. If you're not figuring it out now, if you're not learning about it, it's time to start. You will only benefit even if you decide that it's not for you. It's time to learn about it because it's coming. It's not going away. And the quicker you can figure out how to integrate it into your own work, or at least understand it, I think the better off you'll be. I think that everyone is at a different point in the journey. What we're hearing from some of the users and some of our pilot test accounts of things we're building is, I think the closest analogy is like delegation. That's a skill that people are going to need to learn. And what I mean by that is, what are we going to delegate to these things? I think that I've heard generative AI, the main innovation described maybe in a bit of a hypey way as automating cognition, but I do think that that's kind of close to it. We don't have the right language yet to discuss. But what we all need to figure out, and where I think people are being shown in studies to benefit from, is figuring out what you can delegate to a generative AI machine of some sort and what you need to keep for yourself. And what we are hearing also from customers that are using some of the tools we're building is when it works, when they figure out how to use it right, it feels like they have handed that task off to someone so that they can spend more time on the thing that is where they can really add value. And anybody who's ever had direct reports, you know that doesn't always come easy, and you have to have a different approach for everyone who might work for you. But the only way to fail with delegation is to sort of pretend that you don't need to think about it and hope that the person who you might want to delegate to is going to go away. That's not going to happen with this.
Thanks. Anu, can I toss that to you?
That's a great metaphor. I love that one, Judd. So this idea about, what will research look like 5 years ahead of now was the research question that we took on at Princeton this year for the Ithaka study. So this was part of the national Ithaka cohort. I think that report is not yet completed, but there was a common survey instrument, and I led this work for the library with colleagues from the graduate school and the Center for Science and Technology. And I'll share just a couple of themes that came out. One was about this concept of expertise. So how is it defined? What makes someone an expert in a particular discipline? How can you assess a person's expertise? And I think generative AI is really causing us to rethink that. So if you think about how graduate school is done today, a lot of times the first few years, graduate students are, going through these reading lists that have been constructed by their professors. The reading lists have been curated over years. And by engaging with the sources, the student kind of slowly identifies gaps in the scholarly record, and then they spend 2 years focusing on a particular gap, and then they finish their doctorate and then become faculty members, et cetera, et cetera. And the process can vary a little bit by discipline to discipline, but there's a general assumption that it's the faculty in the department that have the expertise, and they are helping the graduate student become that expert. And I think generative AI really changes this process. So generative AI can summarize concepts quickly for a third grader and for a second-year PhD student, and it can guide the student by giving them just a little bit harder information, and slowly they can manage their own learning. And I think that really changes the relationships that people will have with their academic departments and with their academic advisors. I think that piece really will change how higher ed works and how research is done. How will you find out who is an expert, and how will you learn from experts? So that's one thing that comes to mind, kind of looking at how research is done. I'm also really hearing a lot of excitement for how generative AI can be used in kind of niche uses, things like reading X-rays and MRIs. There's so much evidence accumulating that generative AI is dramatically better than human physicians at interpreting this kind of data. I'm hearing examples from astronomy and biology. Most recently, I just heard a podcast about how generative AI is decoding conversations that bats have with each other, which wouldn't be the first thing that would come to my mind. I completely agree with something Ellen had mentioned before, that librarians really need to be ready to provide training on AI literacy. I just went to EDUCAUSE webinar on frameworks for AI literacy that I found very helpful. And part of that does mean we have to play with it ourselves, but also part of it means we need to understand how it works and what happens under the hood. Not in great detail, we don't need to understand all the math, but we need to understand the systematic aspect of some of this. The speed with which the generative AI tools are evolving is actually so incredible. And I think that makes it stressful for librarians. If you ask ChatGPT the same question 2 weeks in a row, you'll likely get better answers the second time around. And that's just within the same tool. There's brand new tools coming all the time. So I'm wondering, what are some areas where we can support librarians in this process of learning and learning how to use this technology, and also learning how to help others to get better at prompt design, which isn't something we were even talking about a few years ago.
Thanks, Anu. Ellen, can you finish out that question?
Yeah, thanks, Anu. That was a lot of good themes. I want to speak to what you just mentioned about AI hesitancy, and Judd, you mentioned this too. I would say 9 months ago, my research team, really smart, intelligent research librarians, different levels of experience, were very AI hesitant, right? Because we can't trust these tools. There's hallucination. So I would say yes, absolutely. We're not using ChatGPT for research, but all of these tools, from Scopus, Elsevier, all of the big ones, they're developing their own in-house custom models. They're using APIs framework. So everything changed November 2022 when that was released. So if you want to get good at the research tools, you need to get good at using ChatGPT so you understand that core knowledge. And the AI hesitancy, some of the people at my work, PhDs, no, Ellen, I want to do it myself. I want to code. I trust myself writing the math. I absolutely get it. But look at the future. The Nobel Prize winners are not necessarily the chemists. They're the artificial intelligence, machine learning specialists. So we need a balance. We need the experts, expertise in a domain or a field, but also the generative AI knowledge. And I think librarians are very adept at learning new technologies and having patience teaching others how they work. So we're primed for that. So anyway, that's about AI hesitancy. It's not going to take our jobs. Think of it like a lifeboat. If you learn generative AI, you become AI fluent, you will absolutely save 2 hours a day at work. What are you going to do with those extra 2 hours? We're not going to work more. We need a better work-life balance.
We do. So in order to be inclusive in this conversation, we've also asked ChatGPT to be part of the conversation. Ellen's going to run this for us because it turns out Ellen is by far the most polite user of ChatGPT of any of us on this panel, and therefore may absolutely receive the best results of any of us.
Well, there are studies that if you're polite, it'll do a better job. And I think also it's kind of known, if you look at who is using the training data, what industry, if you say, this is really important, my boss is walking in the room, I'm going to get fired, what do I do? ChatGPT will do a better job.
Thank you.
Okay,
We've
anyway,
all learned something.
let's do a voice demo, Tracy. And I'm going to go off on some of the questions and the themes from your report. So if you aren't using voice prompting, this is my shout out to Test It. They have an advanced voice prompting. You can pick your accent or your voice. All right, so just bear with me. This is a live demo. Good afternoon, ChatGPT. How are you?
Hey, Ellen. How's it going? How's the AI panel discussion?
Oh, it's going pretty good. We have a really good turnout. So I want to ask you a question, and maybe you can be kind of a creative thought partner on this, but what are the benefits for scholarly publishers for integrating generative AI into their workflow? And also my audience is mostly librarians, also publishers, and some tech people. So can you give me some bullet points, not just research and writing, but the other parts of the process, dissemination, evaluation, impact? Give me some bullets and keep it under 80 seconds, please.
Absolutely. Here are some key benefits for scholarly publishers integrating generative AI. Enhanced discoverability. AI can enrich metadata, improving searchability and discoverability of content. 2. Automated workflows. Streamlining tasks like formatting, plagiarism checking, and even suggesting peer reviewers, freeing up editorial teams. 3. Personalized marketing. AI can analyze reader behavior to create targeted campaigns, increasing engagement and subscriptions. 4. Impact analysis. Generative AI can assess article impact through citation trends and social media mentions, providing valuable insights for authors and publishers. 5. Content adaptation. AI can repurpose content into different formats, like audio or video, expanding reach to diverse audiences. These points showcase how AI enhances efficiency and innovation across the publishing process.
Thank you, ChatGPT. Put that all in an email for me. I want to send it to my fellow panelists after. And that's it. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much. Judd, any response to that?
Only that as in a household of multilingual speakers and with some in-laws who don't speak Dutch, I've discovered that you could also say, now please give that to me in Dutch, and it will give it to you immediately, conversationally, and perfect.
Wonderful
Which
use.
for some reason blows my mind, but yeah.
Anu?
I love that the demo was part of our panel. It's a good way to close our conversation.
Ellen?
No, thanks for convening this conversation. Do we have time for
We have time for questions.
Okay.
As the mic starts to circulate, I'm just going to say too that once a librarian, also a librarian. I'm thrilled that metadata generation is mentioned there because I think this is a real area that we need the assistance, and there's real potential here for some of the work that has exceeded our sort of time and capabilities. So any questions? We have a few minutes left.